All right. Well, without further ado, we're going to pivot to NFL Network national reporter Cameron Wolfe, who joins us now. And I guess since it's top of mind, Cameron, we'll start with trade deadline day. Some big names got moved, maybe some names not everyone was expecting, and it happened largely in this division with the Jets moving on from Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams. My question to you is, while the Jets have acquired some extraordinary draft capital here for the next two drafts, people kind of felt like they were rebuilding already under Aaron Glenn, and now you take arguably two of their top four defensive players off of that roster who are still in their mid-20s, and those are now two holes you have to fill going forward. How do you feel the rebuild looks for the Jets now that Williams and Gardner are elsewhere?
Yeah, good afternoon, fellas. First of all, they're starting over. It's really starting to rebuild from scratch mid-season because you looked at those guys as at least part of your foundation that you're building. Now they have relatively little foundation outside of draft picks. And so the feel I got around the league was they did get good value in both of those trades, in particular, getting two first round picks from Sauce Gardner. So you can't crush them for the value, but you got to be able to draft well, or otherwise you've got three first round picks of potential. And so, yeah, I think it probably sets their timeline back another year, and it may be a couple of years before we're talking about the Jets as even a playoff contender, after this reset again.
Yeah, but with the haul they got for Sauce and the picks they are going to get or going to have going forward, it looks like they're going to have enough draft capital to get whatever guy they want, even if it has to be the first pick of the draft.
Yep, that's it. That's it right there. It's a team that knows they need a quarterback. They were going through the stopgap path with Justin Fields, and clearly it hasn't worked. And they said we'd rather go all in and make sure we get our quarterback. And if we've got to lose two defensive players in Sauce Gardner and Quinn Williams to do it, then we're willing to do it. And that's the bet they're making. So they've already turned the base 2026. Ideally, they start over with their next quarterback, and they'll probably be bad enough that they may be able to get it with their own pick. But just in case, they've got ammo. And what's also interesting, they have three first round picks in 2027. So depending on how they feel about this quarterback class, they could certainly wait till 27 for the quarterback and build around with the other picks at another position. So it'll be quite the interesting offseason, the next two off seasons around draft time for the Jets.
What did you make, Cameron, of the fact that aside from Indianapolis and Pittsburgh, a lot of the AFC contenders stood pat? Now, that's not to say they weren't trying to get deals done. We just heard from Brandon
Right.
Beane, who, quite frankly, seemed a little disappointed that he didn't get anything done. But Buffalo, New England, Denver, Kansas City, none of them did anything here at the deadline. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I consider these are teams that were really tight on their values and in their purses. I'll just start with KC and Buffalo because they're the two teams that have been in the AFC Championship. Probably the teams that people considered the favorites. Both of those teams tight to the salary cap. Both of those teams reluctant to give up day two or day one picks for guys who are rentals. And I think that's ultimately what we saw here, where teams, as we saw with Jaelan Phillips, wanted a third round pick for a lot of these rentals, and they didn't move for that. I know Kansas City called on Breece Hall, and the Jets held firm on a third round pick as their value, and he's still a Jet. And I know the Bills were in the market for wide receiver and defensive tackle, and the market just didn't come their way. I think if Rashid Shaheed's price was a little lower, maybe he's a Bill today. But the Seahawks were able to make a move there and get that guy. And I think Brandon Beane alluded to it in his press conference. It's kind of weird when you're the Bills and the two teams that are selling are in your division, and nobody wants to trade any elite players within your division. I look at this as teams that were not willing to do hey, I'm putting all my poker chips in, for better or for worse. I know fans will probably say, hey, they should have, but I live here in Miami, and I could tell you a team that's regretting going all in on some of the decisions they've made over the last few years, and now they're ruining it. So it's a weird balance, but you're right. The AFC is wide open because no one made that one move to say, "Hey, I'm now the favorite."
You're down there in Miami. Is there a move from the Dolphins that was expected that did not happen for you guys that cover the team?
No, I don't think so. I think there was a lot of like speculation about Jalen Waddle. My understanding that was never really a real consideration. They would have needed that Sauce Gardner, Quentin Williams type package of multiple first round picks or first and second round pick to even consider that, and that just wasn't his market. So I think the Jaelan Phillips deal was expected. They had been talking to Philly for over a week about that. I thought they might get one or two other pieces off, Bradley Chubb or Minka Fitzpatrick, but the offers just weren't very high for either player. Both making a lot of money this year. Teams don't really want to eat money mid-season either, and so I think that's why you see both of those guys still here. We'd rather, from the Dolphins standpoint, keep a veteran who may be able to help us compete rather than get a sixth or seventh round pick if we've got to pay his salary anyway.
All right, so since we've brought up the Dolphins, why don't we stay there since that's Buffalo's opponent here in Week 10. And we're trying to get a handle on this. I mean, from the outside looking in, it looks like a death march for this team to the finish at 2-7. Their GM canned. They've got the interim there. So I don't know. Like, people are waiting for the other shoe to drop with Mike McDaniel. It sounds like he's going to at least finish the season as the head coach. Players' morale can't be high. How would you term this locker room and this team, knowing they still have 8-9 games to play?
Yeah, it's been a nightmare season for Miami. They started the year with hopes and dreams that they could try to challenge Buffalo, and that quickly became clear that wasn't going to be the case. I've been in the locker room a few times this season, and I'll tell you what, they haven't been the somber woe is me group that you'd probably expect from a team that had high expectations that didn't go well. I think they're very young. So although they've been in the hunt, this version of the Dolphins hasn't been in the hunt. And I think they are kind of managing a situation where they know their future may be in someone else's hands. So you see guys playing with fight still. That being said, they don't have the talent that they've had in recent years. They're much less talented, especially on the offensive and defensive line, and they need a lot more from Tua than they ever had. And that's when we're starting to see some of his weaknesses get exposed when he's kind of forced to do too much. So the Bills will go into town. If they come ready to play, they should handle this Dolphins team. They're a better squad in a lot of different categories. But at this stage, I haven't seen them quit on the year to where you'll see a team kind of lollygag out there and not play.
How big a hole does Jaelan Phillips' absence make? He's a guy that he's been a really good player for the Dolphins, and now he's not. He's in Philly. How big a void does he leave? And is his void as big on the defensive side as maybe even Tyreek's was on the offensive side?
Not quite that big, but I'll say this, like Jaelan Phillips was their most productive pass rusher. Like he hadn't had the sack numbers yet, but his pressure rates were top 15 in the NFL. He was consistently the guy that would get into the backfield, that would get the pressure. The only criticism I think Dolphins fans had is he didn't finish some of those sacks, and he had one against the Chargers that if he sacked Justin Herbert, they get a win. But he was their first round pick, their top pass rusher of the future. He got hurt a couple times with serious injuries, and that's the only reason why he's available. I just think there's not enough trust for a rebuilding team and his health to be able to invest the money that he's probably going to get this offseason. So, yeah, Bradley Chubb is still there. He'll be their top edge rusher. And then Matthew Judon, who they signed earlier, he'll slide into a starting role. And then they have kind of a collection of young guys behind him. But they were already very weak as far as production in the pass rush department. This obviously makes them even weaker. And so definitely a good day for the Bills and Josh Allen to be able to pass the ball. They should have some time back there.
And then what about the status of Chop? Concussion. I'm assuming he's in the protocol, but has anything been said about, I know it's early in the week here, Cameron. Anything been
he's
said
still
about
in the
his
protocol.
outlook?
He's still in the protocol. He's not practicing today. I was there at the game. It was ugly looking of a concussion. Like he was in the medical tent for about 10 minutes. He had to be held up by trainers, walking to the locker room. He had towels over his head. It was, I don't know like the severity of concussions, but it definitely looked more alarming than most. So I would not be surprised if you don't see Chop Robinson this week. But that hasn't been official yet. It's just kind of my feel based on the situation. So my thought is you'll see the edge rushers that I talked about, and we'll see if something changes later in the week.
What are some of the other Dolphins that are either questionable or might have some doubt as to whether they can suit up on Sunday?
They've got a couple guys in the secondary, Ife Melifonwu and Ashton Davis. They're two safeties outside of Minka Fitzpatrick that are up in the air. I think they're probably 50-50 to go, if not. But otherwise, they should be relatively straight to go, and they're going to try to score some points. They know they're lacking on the defensive side of the ball. That's been a struggle point for them all year, and so their only route to really keep up is can they get the ball to Devon Achane, get the ball to Jalen Waddle as they did in spurts in the first half against the Ravens, and hope to keep up with that team.
All right, Cam. Thanks as always for the time. We appreciate it. We'll catch up with you down the line.
Appreciate you, fellas.
All right, that's NFL Network national reporter Cameron Wolfe.